I just wanted to welcome you to our presentation, one of our wildlife sprints, and we're so fortunate to have Cathy Schoonmaker from the National Park Service with us today. Cathy is a biologist and she has done so much work for us in our communities. I know I've worked with her since 2017, and some of the projects that we've worked together on have been, well, raptor perches at Agoura High School, gopher and ground squirrel projects, presentations, walk through homes and HOAs to look at ways that we can mitigate issues with rodents, help with newsletters to owl box placements. So we're so fortunate to have her as a resource as well as presenting to us tonight. So on that note, I will turn it over to Cathy. And just in case you don't know who I am, I'm Carolyn Tracino. I'm with the Old Agoura Homeowners, as well as the director of Poison Free Agoura. So, Cathy?
And feel free to interrupt as we go. This is clearly very informal, but there's a lot of content. And maybe a lot of you already know a lot about the research that the National Park Service is currently doing, so I'll probably skim through a lot of it. But primarily what we're really talking about today is just the wildlife that lives around us. As you can see, I have lots of different species here on our first slide. And these are all animals that you can find in your neighborhoods, in your backyards, especially if you live on what we call the urban wildland interface. And that's where the wildland habitat is adjacent to or near the urban developed areas. So lots of people like moving and living adjacent to these natural habitats because it's easy access to outdoor recreation, which we all know increases community health and happiness when they can get outside and recreate. But with that, often you can expect to encounter the wildlife that live in these natural areas adjacent to these urban developed areas. And so, as you can see, we have various different species here that go into the urban areas, and you can see a lot of them are during the daytime in these photos, and that's not terribly uncommon. So the National Park Service, we have been studying bobcats since 1996. And we've been studying mountain lions since 2002. And in 1996, we were studying coyotes as well to about 2008. And during that time, we were looking at urban association, movement patterns of the animals, the diet, and causes of mortality. Now, I should say for anyone who might be watching this video later, this is specifically the Santa Monica Mountains recreation area and the neighborhoods and habitats that are adjacent to the Santa Monica Mountains. So one of the things that we are looking at is how some of the natural resources are threatened and how it impacts the wildlife that lives in these areas. And some of the natural resource threats that the wildlife encounter are encroachment of development into the natural habitat and taking away the habitat, fragmentation where habitat is divided and you get these small little patches of habitat, but to get from one patch to the other, wildlife actually have to go through the urban developed areas. New development causes some of this encroachment as well as the fragmentation, and then you just get the change or the alteration of that habitat, which might be this particular picture with alteration is actually the dump, but something else that might be an alteration would be like baseball fields or golf courses that are put in, or even cemeteries. And then comes with all of that is that loss of natural habitat, which leads to that fragmentation, and that can be with roads that are dividing and development, and then it often can lead to roadkill for wildlife, impacts the dispersal of young animals, and then ultimately it leads to that increase of neighborhoods near that natural habitat, which leads to more wildlife in urban areas. So some of the things that we've seen in our study is there's a lot of mortality from roads. This is 18 mountain lions from 2002 to 2018 that we were actually able to recover and we knew about that were hit by cars throughout the region of our study area. This goes all the way up to the 5 freeway and the 118. We also saw mortality not just from mountain lions, but of course bobcats and coyotes, which that's expected. We have a lot of roads, so we expected to see that type of mortality. One of the things that we didn't expect to see, though, is exposure to rat poisons, and we began to see that with bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions throughout our study as well. And this exposure to rodenticide poisons is usually unintentional. Most people are putting out poisons to control squirrels, gophers, and even just rats and mice. But what happens is these species are actually the prey items of our carnivores, our bobcats, our coyotes, and our mountain lions. And of course, unfortunately, once a poisoned prey is eaten, that poison we have seen actually moves up the food chain. We've actually had 7 mountain lions die directly from anticoagulant rodenticide poisons. Rodenticides or rodents are not their primary source of food, which we'll talk about later, but they will eat coyotes that might have eaten the poisoned rodents, and that would be how it would move up the food chain. So in our study, we found that 90% of the bobcats that we were able to recover tested positive for rodenticide poisons. 98% of the mountain lions in our study also tested positive for rat poisons, including a 3-month-old kitten and 4 fetuses. We also see that raccoons, gray foxes, and many other species that maybe we're not studying on a regular basis, but we pick up as roadkill occasionally, also encounter these rodenticide poisons. And this was the picture on the lower side here, the lower, I think it would be left for you guys, is a raccoon that actually died underneath someone's deck. And it actually died from rat poisons. And you can see the rodent boxes directly in front of that deck there. This is our study area. And we're looking here in the Santa Susanas, the Simi Hills, as well as the Santa Monica Mountains. We do a little bit of work in Los Padres, but not too far over there. And then this over here is Griffith Park. So Agoura Hills is kind of, can you guys all see my cursor?
Yes.
Moving? Okay, good. So right about here, I would say, is Agoura Hills. This is the Liberty Canyon area. And so this is a good primary area of our study location. We do a lot of work in the Simi Hills. We do a lot of work in the Santa Monica Mountains. And as I said, we do some work here in the Santa Susanas. So we use GPS radio tracking collars to locate we basically fix the animal after we capture them. We put the radio collar on them so we can get an idea of their home range, their movement patterns, and kind of where they're going. But also what it tells us is mortality, because it does have a mortality signal. So once that animal should die, and we're able to recover the body and determine what it died from.
Did you say you fix the animal once you catch them?
No, we actually fix the collar on the animal. So.
Okay, wondering.
We do not fix the animal. Okay. So this is just a nice example of P22, who was pretty much in that urban interface landscape. But this is not uncommon for other mountain lions that live adjacent to urbanization, as well as here in the Santa Monica Mountains, where we have a lot of private land throughout the mountains. Mountain lions are especially vulnerable to the effects of urbanization, and a lot of that is because they have these very large home ranges. A male mountain lion has a home range that's about 140 square miles, and a female mountain lion can have a home range from 50 to about 70 square miles. This is location points, so it's a whole bunch of dots. So each color is a different mountain lion, and you can see that they have their little home range clusters of where they live, but you can see that there's mountain lions here in the Santa Monica Mountains, as well as mountain lions here in the Simi Hills. This was just a snapshot from January, February of 2022.
So would we be at the bottom here of that cluster at the top?
We're right about here. See this? Yeah, so this is the 101 freeway right here. And you can see this is where you're not seeing a lot of movement across the freeway.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that gap here. And that's because it's very hard for them to get across this freeway. So this is a pretty good border and barrier. And this is what we've seen through these location points. Kind of draws a nice picture.
For instance, for the red, like there's a cluster of red over on the right.
This one here, yeah, this is P22.
Oh, okay.
This is the mountain lion that was in Griffith Park
one.
for 10 years.
So the other red is a different cat then.
So this guy over here, yeah, is a completely different cat.
Okay.
And we have the ones all up above with the.
These are all the ones in the Simi Hills, yes, at that time. Now, not all of them are still alive right now. So this, remember, was in 2022. We're in 2024 now. So over time, animals get hit by cars. They might die from rat poisons. There's various sources of mortality that are caused for mountain lions.
So again, going back to for the red, so is all of the red aside from P22 the same cat? Like
yes.
There's some that are down.
Yes, and just like the orange here. So you can see this orange one.
It's moved around. Okay.
Yes. And so what happens, what you see is the males often have these larger home ranges. And they have these larger home ranges and they wander. And a lot of it is to protect their habitat. But what also happens is, I believe this was a young male. And these young ones, they get pushed to the edge of the habitat here. You can see he doesn't spend a lot of time in the middle, but he's along the edges here. So they get more this, what we call suboptimal habitat, not good habitat. And they're looking for ways to get out because they can't live in the Santa Monica Mountains if it's already filled with other mountain lions. So as they become older and they have to leave their mom, they have to disperse, they need to find their own home range and territory. The problem is you have this, what we call an island, where you have the 101 freeway that blocks them from being able to cross. You have the 405 freeway that's also hard to cross. You have the ocean, nowhere to go there. And then over here on this other side is what we call, it's basically the Oxnard Plains, where you have all this agricultural land and the habitat is not conducive for them to actually use.
Huh.
Okay. Another example of home ranges and just points, and this is from up to 2013. So this was 2002, I think, to 2013. And this is just to show that mountain lions are here. Mountain lions have been here for years. They occupy the habitat. They, as I said, some die, new ones come in or are born. And so you have these lions all over through the mountains. And then you can even see up in the Santa Susanas, we had a couple mountain lions that we were collaring there. And these lions actually did cross. We did have like 2 lions cross underneath the Corganville Tunnel in the Santa Susanas, and they made it into the Simi Hills.
That last one with the orange on the outside, that's a really powerful map to show people.
This one here?
The one before this one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that would shock people.
Yeah.
You can see how the freeways are totally surrounding them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very much, and that's why these location points and having these animals collared really, and looking all these points together really shows an image. It shows a picture of what's happening here. And the need to be able to cross. So if these animals can't cross the freeway, they can't disperse, they will kill each other. So the males will kill the young, because they're protecting their territory. They try to cross the road, they get hit by a car. And then we have the problem where we have inbreeding. So you'll have fathers mating with their young, their daughters, or you'll have grandfathers mating with their granddaughters. So, or you'll have siblings mating with each other over time, right? So, so inbreeding is a big problem that we're seeing in the Santa Monica Mountains as well.
And that's where you're seeing the tails that are.
That's where we're seeing the kinked tails. Yeah, I didn't give a picture of that, but we actually have started seeing deformities in the tails where they have a kinked tail. We've had testes that aren't dropping properly, and sperm that aren't forming properly as well. So we're definitely starting to see that deformity, which is been a huge reason for the push for the wildlife crossing, so these animals can actually disperse, and new animals can from the Simi Hills or maybe even from the Santa Susanas will eventually make their way into the Santa Monica Mountains, which helps change up that genetic diversity. And this is just an example of the proposed wildlife crossing that is actually on its way of being built now. And you can see that it will go over the 101 freeway, which you've probably driven underneath it, but also it's going to go over Agoura Road. Right now, we're just in phase 1, though.
That's going to be so exciting when it goes over Agoura Road.
Oh, yeah.
See what that looks like, you know?
And it's not just going to help mountain lions. It's going to help all these different species. We also have done studies with bobcats, coyotes, and we have found that the same, very similar, where you have home ranges that are very specific. They're only on the north side of the freeway or only on the south side of the freeway. So the freeway ends up being quite a barrier for bobcats as well as coyotes. So we're gonna see a lot more information. We'll be doing cameras on the bridge. We'll also be tracking wildlife around the bridge as well, just so we can see what ends up happening once the bridge is completed. But we expect all these different species to use it.
That was a question that my grandkids we were talking about the other day, is there will be cameras up there. Will there be cameras that the public can look at? You know, like they have the Eagle cams and stuff like that? Or is it
I
just...
don't think we're going to have any live feed,
Okay.
but we will post the photos.
Because it would be cool if it was a live feed.
Yeah, and I think there might be some. I mean, I don't think you'll see much of anything, to be honest with you.
Right. Yeah. Would you be
Most
sitting
of
there
the
all
time
night
it'll be
waiting?
empty and probably pretty boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think that right now they have any plans for live feed. But you know, maybe over time we might talk about that.
But
Will
you
they
all,
be like counting the animals? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. The whole idea is how long will it take for species to start using it? Which species will use it first? What?
are they
So
like
yeah, absolutely,
motion,
we're going to be monitoring
motion
it.
detector cameras that go
Motion
on?
detected, yes,
Yeah.
wildlife cameras.
you don't
Very cool.
necessarily want to have live feed, because if there's a mountain lion going across and people see there's a mountain lion, they may run
Yeah.
up there to see the mountain lion. You know, people aren't too swift.
Well, there are definitely some concerns that we have, not just for the public safety, but also for the wildlife safety.
Right.
Another question is, will people still be able to cross? Will people be able to cross over there?
No, this is strictly for wildlife at the moment.
I mean, if somebody's out hiking, is it going to be blocked so that they can't?
My guess is no. I don't know how they're going to handle that. But right now, I think we're specifically just asking people not to use it, and it would be just for the wildlife.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know how we're going to
I
keep
can
people,
picture people wanting to go across that and continue.
Yeah, I'm sure that will be something that will
Yeah.
have to be addressed at some point. But there will be no official hiking trail or anything like that across the bridge. Okay, so back to mountain lions, and so what do they eat? So we did almost 800 kill sites, and we found that primarily what these animals eat are mule deer, but they do eat other things. I mentioned they'll eat coyotes and raccoons and badgers, and we've seen them eat quite a few, and we've even seen them eat rodents before as well.
Oh.
So they'll eat one deer about every 3 to 4 weeks. Sometimes if it's really hot, they might eat every 2 weeks. So depending on the weather. And mountain lions, though, will take other animals besides wild animals, which is unfortunate because they don't know the difference. So sometimes they will take livestock. They'll take sheep, goats, alpacas, llamas, like potbelly pigs, miniature horses, even people's dogs. So we really want to encourage people to think about where they live and think about the wildlife that potentially lives there. And mountain lions, especially in your neighborhoods, I would say all of your neighborhoods, mountain lions are a potential to be there. So if you have any livestock animals, we definitely keep them safe and lock them up or put them in full enclosures at nighttime. We've had from 2002 to 22, we had 71 different properties and 131 incidents where mountain lions had actually taken more of livestock or domestic animals. And so with that said, you can see that it's throughout the whole Santa Monica Mountains, but also in the Simi Hills and in the Verdugos. And even there was an incident in Griffith Park. So it happens everywhere. One of the things I really want to point out, though, it's not just one animal. It's many different animals. We've had 15 males that were collared, and these are only collared animals that we know about. And you should keep in mind that not all mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains or adjacent areas are collared, because we would never be able to confirm that we have all the animals. And in fact, many of them, well, I wouldn't say many, but we are definitely have some that are elusive that we cannot catch. So with that said, we had 20 GPS collared mountain lions that actually had what we say depredation, have actually taken livestock animals or pets. 15 of them are males, 5 of them are females. So it is males and females, but it's not just all one animal. It can happen with other mountain lions as well. So the moral of the story is it's not one bad actor. Often there are more than one lion that will take. So they're opportunistic, I think I want to say, is if it's available, they run into a livestock animal, something that looks like prey to them and is easy to catch, then they're going to take that opportunity to do that, to catch it. And it's easier to catch animals that are in pens because they have nowhere to go than it is to catch a deer that can run away from them. So one of the things we really want to encourage is landscaping in mountain lion country, keeping your pets indoors, especially at nighttime, supervising your children if you have children in these areas, and then exercise some outside lighting that is motion censored. So it's not on all the time, because on all the time is not going to do anything for them. Basically but if it's, and even just the lighting just coming on every once in a while might scare them away at first, but maybe they'll get used to that. But what the lighting does when it's motion censored is it gives you the ability to see that something is out there. So then now you're going to go, oh, what's outside? Is it an animal? What should I be aware of? What's going on? And then what I mean by landscape wisely, we'll talk a little bit more about landscape later, but sometimes it's just about wanting to keep some of the prey animals that mountain lions eat off of your property as well, right? So you don't want to necessarily have a bunch of deer in your garden eating your garden, because deer are their primary food source. So I mentioned the different types of species or animals, that you want to keep safe. So any of your domestic animals, definitely want to point out miniature horses and goats as well, and your dogs and llamas. And some of the ways that you can keep them safe, you can actually take some of your enclosures that you currently have that maybe are not fully covered or not fully protected, and you can do kind of like some extra wiring that leads from the roof down all the way down to the ground to keep those animals safe. So you want to keep the mountain lion from actually being able to get through the bars or to jump over. Some people have guard dogs for their animals, which that is something that works really well. Also, we've seen that guard dogs actually work with these larger herds of goats. But one of the sure proof things that really seems to work is having a full enclosure for your animal. And that means having a roof on it that can handle the weight of a 150-pound mountain lion. It can't just be a tarp over the top, because obviously the lion will go right through the tarp. So it needs to be a full roof that can hold that weight. And then bringing them in, particularly at nighttime, and kind of that dusk through dawn time.
Cathy, that's also, you recommend that for chicken coops to have that strength, because many people have chicken coops and they might have bought them and from certain places, but you recommend to have that kind of strength to mitigate any issues with those mountain lions, correct?
Yeah, I mean, chickens, you wouldn't think chickens would be something that the mountain lions would go for, but I think, like I said, they're very opportunistic. So anything that's really available for them. So chickens, and even if you don't think you have mountain lions in your area, just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not there. You can look at the map that I showed you. They're just kind of all over the place. So act as if they're there, and protect your pets and your livestock as if they're there. And chickens are certainly a food source for them, but also bobcats will go for chickens, coyotes will go for chickens, and they'll go for them. Coyotes are out during the day all the time, and they will eat chickens. And once they start to get that feel that the chickens are there, once they learn the chickens are there, they'll continue to come back and hunt them. The other thing is you have raptors, right? So you have red-tailed hawks that might go for your chickens also. So you really want to keep them in a full enclosure. I live on the urban edge or the wildland edge, and I have chickens, and I always keep them inside their enclosure all the time, just because for their safety. And my kids would freak out if they died from that. So I definitely keep them in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our coyotes and our coyote research. So we did telemetry. We do telemetry on coyotes for a long time, as well as we did scat studies. So we particularly wanted to understand what these animals were eating, and how that impacted their use of the urban areas. And so you can actually look at the scat very much like owl pellets, where the bones and the fur can tell you what species and what they were eating. So we would clean the scat. You might be surprised, but we had a call out for volunteers to actually help us pick through this fun poop after we washed it. So we would wash it, we would separate it, and then we'd had volunteers, and we had over 300 volunteers sign up to help us.
They want to be
what was that?
Poop pickers.
They
wanted to be poop pickers.
We call them scat parties.
Okay.
So we had scat parties every month, and we had people go through the scat with us, and so they would separate the fur from the bones, and we would also see lots of fruit in our scat. So this is specifically coyotes that we were looking at in this study. And what we did, and this is how we separated it, we put it in different little bowls so that we could see what the different contents were, and then we determined what the fruit or what the seeds were, as well as what prey items they were eating. And so this is kind of a graph of what we found through our research. So we picked up scat in Thousand Oaks, kind of that urban wildland interface. And then we went down to downtown Los Angeles, and we were picking up scat in some of those parks and fragmented habitats that are actually in Los Angeles too. And we wanted to compare the difference between them. So one of the things that you can see when you look at Los Angeles is there is a little bit more in the way of anthropogenetic foods, so human-related foods that the animals were eating, which that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And the domestic cat was a little bit higher of what they would eat compared to in Thousand Oaks adjacent area. So it's not just Thousand Oaks, because we actually picked up scat in Morrison Ranch and Chesbrough Canyon there. So kind of your neighborhoods as well. And so domestic cat was much lower. And some of that might be just because there's more outdoor cats, specifically in Los Angeles. Maybe we didn't do a cat study, so we can't say for sure. But there's also potentially more feral cats as well, colonies in Los Angeles. One of the things I really would like to point out, though, is ornamental foods. So it's important to understand that coyotes are omnivores. So they're not just looking for prey, they're actually looking for things like your fruit that drops from the trees. And you can see during the dry season, they really switch a lot to that fruit because that's when all the fruit is falling and available. And that's that May through October time. And then even during the wet season, there's still some fruits that are available that they're eating as well. And we found things like pyracantha berry seeds. We found loquat seeds. We found apple seeds, grape seeds. So pretty much everything, and most everything that figs were a huge food source for them, as well as palm trees. If you watch throughout the seasons, you'll see that palm trees are constantly dropping fruits as well, and that's a great food source for them. So with that said, knowing what's in your backyard might help you understand why coyotes may be coming into your backyard as well. I talk to a lot of people, and I often hear that, well, wildlife should stay in the natural habitat and people belong in the urban areas. But when you see this urban wildland edge here, it's really hard to tell a coyote or a bobcat that you can't come into our urban neighborhood, right? They don't understand that. They don't get that. That's not, and there's no sign that says no wildlife here, right? So it's really up to us to help them by not having the attractants in our neighborhoods for them. So let's understand maybe a little bit why these animals might be coming into these urban areas. And a lot of times it's just to explore. It's adjacent. They're trying to expand their home range maybe. Maybe it's a young animal that's actually trying to find a home range. And so you'll see them come through the urban neighborhoods. They might be attracted by the food, as I mentioned, the food resources that we have in our backyards. Maybe somebody's feeding them. And with mountain lions, we found this upper map here is actually mountain lion that would go into kind of that Woodland Hills area and was trying to find a little home range for himself, or trying to at least get out of the Santa Monica Mountains so he wouldn't get killed by another mountain lion. So this is not uncommon for these young animals to try to disperse and try to find a way out. They also might be attracted to that potential habitat for them. We've had bobcats actually den underneath people's houses. This bottom picture here on the right is a bobcat mom that's holding a kitten in her mouth, and she's moving it out because we actually tagged her. So she didn't want to be underneath this house anymore because it was not private. So we kind of scared her out of that area. But this is just a perfect example with deferred maintenance. Underneath the crawl spaces of your homes is a fantastic den spot for bobcats, raccoons, skunks, all kinds of different species of animals. So I talked a little bit about dispersal. This is just another slide about mountain lions dispersing, and this is another example of that Woodland Hills area where this mountain lion is just kind of coming right up to through the neighborhoods where it looks natural, but they keep encountering these homes, and then you hit the freeway and they have nowhere else to go. Easy food. When you put out trash or people just leave their trash out, uneaten foods, this is possums that took advantage of it. So we had 3 species of animals that took advantage of this one takeout meal that someone had left over. This is a possum, a skunk, and then of course the coyote found it as well. And so when they're successful, they often come back to these areas to look for more food. So how are some of the ways that we can actually live with these animals being adjacent to us, coming through our neighborhoods, maybe into our backyards? Well, I think the very first thing is know the wildlife that's in your area. So we talked a little bit about that. And then one of the other things that would work or helps is to modify that yard and your neighborhood to reduce some of that potential conflict. So it's kind of being proactive instead of reactive. So make the changes in your yard and your homes before it actually could end up being a problem. This is a picture of P22. in the Hollywood Hills, where the cable guy came in to run a cable line underneath the house, and he ran into P-22 that was hunkering down there during the day in this nice cool spot underneath the house. Had this house been closed up, where he couldn't actually get in there, maybe with some kind of wiring, fencing, then the cable guy would have never run into him, and he wouldn't have access to being underneath this house. The other thing is just having, thinning the vegetation that you have in your areas. And then this house right here on the bottom right is actually a house that we had bobcats den in the backyard one year.
What area was that?
This was actually North Ranch. So whoever it was that was from North Ranch, this is a neighborhood. It's kind of it's a house that shares a adjoining wall between two houses. And they had a hole in the house in the wall. And the female ended up bringing her denning and having her kittens there. And then they wanted to sell the house. So they asked us to come and try to get them out. And there was nothing we could do to actually get them out. All we could say was try to be loud and, a little obnoxious, because what they were enjoying about that is there's no dog in that backyard. It's close to food resources because it's right next to the golf course there. And it was a nice little protective area. So they eventually left on their own. But it all could have been avoided had they never had that hole in the first place, or as soon as that hole came about, that they sealed it up, and they would have kept the bobcat from doing that anyway. But they got some amazing pictures of the bobcats hanging out in their backyard. So I don't think I have any of those. If I do, I'll show you. I'll tell you. So this next slide, I just want to show how overgrown this yard is. And when you have a lot of vegetation, yeah, it feels like a lot of privacy for yourself. You don't see your neighbors, things like that. But it also ends up being great habitat for wildlife to hide in, and you don't even know they're there. So, there's actually, in this picture here on the right side, there's actually an animal hiding in the bushes. So I don't know if you guys, I'm gonna give you a couple seconds to see if you can spot it.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know what it is?
Lion.
Yes. So it's right here. Let's see. Right here. You can see it.
Yeah.
And if you zoom in, here's a picture of them from the other side. So this is a mountain lion that was actually, we'll go back to this first slide. It's right back here in these bushes.
Oh.
And so the only reason we knew that lion was there is nobody would have known it was there, but we knew because we were radio tracking it, and we were radio tracking it on a daily basis because the battery was dying. So we get a notification when the battery starts to die. And we wanted to recollar the animal. And so we were tracking it on a regular basis, and saw that it was in this person's front yard. And we're like, oh boy. And my coworker literally walked past it, and then all of a sudden turned around. It's like, oh, you're right there. And so during that time, the animal did not move. He kept acting like, you don't see me, you don't see me. I mean, he fully knew that my coworker was there, but he was just kind of like cats do, hunkering down and putting their ears down and just kind of hiding, like, you don't see me. And he would have stayed there all day. And most likely what happened, because this is an interesting neighborhood where you have open space, and then you have, like, on the ridge, you have like this strip of housing and street, right? And then on the other side of that road and ridge, you have open space again. So he was most likely just coming from one spot to the other. But what happened is maybe he came a little bit too late. Traffic started to build up. People were around. And so he felt uncomfortable and just kind of hunkered down for the day. He actually ended up staying there all day, didn't move. And we worked with the homeowner, and we ended up darting him there and working them up underneath the basketball court in the driveway. So it was pretty exciting for the homeowner, and great for us because we were able to radio collar him again, and we moved him to the open space. But this is just a perfect example.
I would have said new pet.
It's a very good example of how they can be in your yard and you wouldn't even know it when you have this thick of vegetation. So, and this is the same for coyotes, raccoons, all different types of animals. So we really want to encourage people to do is really trim back that vegetation that you have. If you have a lot of trees, you want to really kind of, or even thick brush, we suggest trimming that actually up 3 feet so that you can see what's underneath. That's not just good for mammals, but it's also good for if you want to see if there's any snakes, around. So it gives you a good visual of the ground to make sure that you don't step on a snake or a snake's not in the bush next to you. So this is on the right-hand side here. This is a couple examples of some thinner vegetation. And this is obviously a nice drought-tolerant yard that's on the bottom here. The other thing, just like we talked about with P22 being underneath someone's house, this is a coyote and her pups. She had 5 pups, and she denned underneath the deck up to the house. So she's right underneath basically the front porch deck. And so with this one, coyotes, they dig holes to make their dens. So they capitalize on being underground or in dark spaces, right? And so these decks are perfect for that. They don't have to work very hard to dig a space out to get in there. It's nice and dark and safe feeling for the pups. It's a kind of a bigger area. It really is very much like a den that's already dug out for them where they didn't have to do any work. And then it's potentially very close to all these fruits that they like to eat, rabbits, things like that. And it's a great place for them to be. So what we ended up doing here, we worked with the homeowner, and we actually put a big spotlight right that was facing right in under the deck here. And that spotlight, and we put a radio, and that kind of really, again, was that obnoxious, not so comfortable. It's not quiet anymore. It didn't feel like a safe spot. So she ended up taking her pups and moving them, which was great for the homeowner. But what she did is she just moved them to the neighbor's deck, right underneath the neighbor's deck. So unless you get everyone to do it, so this is what I mean by being proactive. So it's really important to be that proactive and see what you have around in your yard, in your neighborhood, and make these changes, and talk to your neighbors and teach them about making these changes as well. So you don't have them denning the coyotes or bobcats denning underneath your house or underneath your decks. And here's some examples of exclusion techniques for underneath your decks or sheds, or even sealing up your crawl spaces for your house here. It's best to be able to bury it. So you kind of use an L shape here to bury. And you want to come out about 2 to 3 feet. And the reason for that is because the coyotes, like I said, they like to dig. So they're not strangers about digging, and they will dig. But the idea, if it comes out into that L shape, they actually end up digging into the wire instead of digging underneath the deck. This is just some other additional structure exclusions. So this here is another deck right here where you could do some lattice, or you can put up some other materials. I would suggest, so when I think about exclusion, I like to think about exclusion for rodents as well, because you can see the squirrels like to get into our attics here, under our crawl spaces as well, and then even rodents, right? So I try to think about exclusion for everything. So if I were going to exclude this deck, I would actually make it much smaller wire, so that the rodents weren't getting underneath my deck and living under my deck. So one of the other things I want to mention real quick is just think about what kind of food sources you might have that these animals are eating. Are you feeding your pets outside? Are they going to potentially steal your pet food that's left over, or come and eat the crumbs? So that might be an attractant. Even just bird feeders. You have the rodents that eat the bird feed, or the birds are super messy and all that seed ends up on the ground. And then the rodents come in and eat that. Well, if the rodents are coming in and eating it, well, now maybe you have your bobcat or your coyote that's going to come and hunt those rodents also. So you really want to, I'm not fond of bird feeders. I think that they are super messy, and I think they really attract the rodents. And so if you do have them, though, I would suggest bringing them in at nighttime and cleaning up the seed after the birds have finished during the day. The other thing is compost bins. So I would highly recommend sealing up your compost bins so that they're enclosed bins like this one on the bottom right, because we see rodent or animals going into bins all the time. There's plenty of food here. This coyote, this picture was taken in the open space, so we had a remote camera out in the open space to look at different species out there on the trail, and we got a picture of this coyote with this watermelon in its mouth with the sticker still on it. So clearly it pulled it out of a compost bin or someone's trash can, because that's not something that you see growing in our natural habitat here. So it's just making these resources so they're not available for the animals will help reduce their activity in our urban areas. And this is just a great example of fruit all over the ground. This is so easy for them to eat. It's on the ground, so it's really important to harvest your fruit, pick up all the fallen fruit that's on the ground, as well as close up those trash cans. And we'll talk about just kind of coyote behavior in general. I don't know how many of you have concerns with coyotes, but Carolyn did say that there were some people in the neighborhood that were concerned and nervous about coyotes. And so knowing their behavior and what they're capable of doing is really important, because that will help you be proactive. So we know that they are omnivores and they'll eat fruit that's fallen from our trees, they'll eat from our compost bins, things like that. But it's also important to know that they can dig easily under our fences, that they live underneath our decks if they want to, if it's available for them. And they'll also jump the fences very easily with ease, and especially chain link fence. You'll notice this coyote actually has his foot here that's help pushing him up. So it's not hard for them to get their footing on a chain link fence to jump over. There are some things you can do to modify your fencing. A lot of us have this wrought iron fence, and a lot of times people think that the animals can't actually get through the wrought iron fencing, and that's not true. Some animals can definitely squeeze through them. I've seen coyotes and bobcats actually walk right through the wrought iron fence, depending on some spaces are a little bit bigger than others. So really take a look at that. But I have seen bobcats walk right through these fencing. If you're going to do modifications for coyote and add coyote fencing that's higher, you need to have it at least 7 to 8 feet high. And it should be underground as well, as I mentioned, with that kind of, or some wiring that goes underground to help avoid them digging underneath. And they're good jumpers, so it needs to be that height. And I've seen some people do extensions with lattice. I've seen them do extensions with wire. For the wrought iron fencing, you can do wire, about 2 to 3 feet up, and that would probably help prevent them from actually just walking through that fencing. And it would also help with snakes and rabbits from entering into your yard as well. And then some people have the coyote rollers, or basically the idea of the coyote roller is your fence still has to be high enough, because the idea of the coyote rollers, they don't just jump over the fence, right? So if your fence is too low, they're just going to hop right over it. But with the roller, it needs to be high enough that they have to get their forelegs up and paws, and they roll off of it. So they can't use the top of that fence now to pull themselves up, because they're slipping off of it because of the roller. And then Carolyn already talked about the chickens, but we also know that coyotes can eat our cats and our pets, our dogs. So I see a lot of people doing what we call cat patios now, where you have this outside cage for your cat, and it has a little cat door so they can go in and out. One of my coworkers, as she told me, her whole backyard is actually a cat patio, and they've added the wire to the fencing and things like that, so the cats have kind of access to the whole yard, which is pretty cool. And then you can do just this outdoor caging for some of your other animals if you need to have them outside while you're gone. And I've also seen, this one's pretty neat too, for a dog run basically that's attached to the house. So it's the side of the house, it's attached to the fence, and it has a roof. You could see this wire roofing so that the mountain lions or coyotes don't just jump into the run. And then it has a little doggy door that accesses either the garage or the house. So the animal can go in and out, go to the bathroom whenever they want. So this is a pretty great idea as well. And then I just want to talk real quickly. I know a lot of people, they love the wildlife. And sometimes they love them too much and they feel like they need to feed them and take care of them. And that's not really the best thing for wildlife. It's actually probably hurting them more than it's helping them. This is a coyote that was at Irwin Market in Calabasas, and he would come to the market every single day. And he sat in this, basically laid in this little parking spot, and he would stare at the door, the front door of the market, and watch people go in and out, in and out. And they felt sorry for him. So they would feed him. And we've had people feeding him muffins. I had someone, so it's, a lot of times they would go in and just buy something. But I had one woman that came out and she drove in from home and she had this big container and she just dumped it for the coyote. And it was her leftover rice and beans or something she had made for the coyote. I'm not sure, but it was rice and beans when I went to go check it out. I'm like, oh boy. So the more he sat there, the more he got, right? He got paid. So hanging out in these urban areas, they start to lose their fear of people because people end up feeding them. And this is a good reason why they lose their fear. And this guy here was throwing muffins to him. So he was pretty smart coyote. So one of the things that I like to encourage, especially if you're seeing an animal on a regular basis, is the scaring of coyotes. I like to say that scaring is caring. So the idea of scaring a coyote is not to hurt the animal, but it's to kind of intimidate them and make them fearful of people again. So you want to keep them, you want to frighten them in your yard and in your neighborhood, but I wouldn't do this like in the open space when you're hiking, because that's kind of their turf and their territory. And you could be interacting somewhere where they have a den nearby. So you want to be just mindful of where you're doing this. But the goal is to teach coyotes to be afraid of people. And there's different tools that you can use for it. Some of those tools might be like a can with coins that would roll, and you could throw it at them if they're just kind of hanging out in your yard and you want to scare them off. Or you could use a high pressure hose to spray it at them. You can use whistles and wave your arms, jacket over your head, things like that, air horns, bang pots and pans. One of the main things I really suggest though is coyotes are super smart. So and they often look at you and go, are you serious? So you might scare them. You might use this technique to scare them, and then all of a sudden they'll go a little bit and then they'll stop and they'll turn around and look at you to see if you're gonna follow through or if you're going to do anything else, or if they've gone far enough, right? So they're going to want to use the least amount of energy they need to use to get away from you. And so in those situations, I always want to encourage you, if you can, to go a little bit further and to make sure that you scare them off further away from your area and kind of keep them going. And the other thing I would suggest, especially if you walk pets, I don't often recommend walking your pet alone in the dark or at dusk. I mean, you should be with someone else if you can. But if you are going to walk a pet, and you know that there's coyotes in the neighborhood, or you have wildlife that you're concerned about, I would recommend an umbrella, and or you're making sure you have a jacket, or you have some of these hazing scaring tools that I suggested. But the cool thing about the umbrellas is they're pretty easy to carry. And they have these nice pop-out ones now too. And if an animal starts coming toward you, specifically a coyote, if he starts coming toward you and you have your dog, the first thing you want to do, if it's small enough, you're going to pick it up so it's in your arms. But if you have this umbrella, you can also pop this umbrella out, which can surprise the animal. And then it's a barrier between you and the animal. So it's something that you can wave around, stuff like that. If we were in person, I'd show you and I'd look really silly, but we're here on Zoom. But that's one of the things that we often suggest as well. So quick takeaways from this program is be proactive instead of reactive. So make some of these changes around your home and residence, your yards, ahead of time before you have negative encounters with wildlife, if you can. Never feed wildlife, and don't just approach wildlife and feed them for fun. You know, give them their space because they need the space. Unless, of course, they're in your backyard and you want to get them out of your backyard. And I think that's pretty much it. And I'll just go back to this last slide about don't feed wildlife, because that's really one of the most important things I can't stress enough, intentionally and unintentionally. This particular was intentionally feeding wildlife, right? It started with one raccoon, and the woman thought it was just super cute and so fun. Well, that raccoon decided to bring all its friends and family. And so it ended up multiplying quite quickly. Over time, they had her trained, and they would ring the wind chimes and tell her that it was time to eat, and she'd come out and feed them. And then if she wasn't in town, you see all this nice outside lawn or cushions for the chairs and stuff. When she was out of town one weekend, they actually ripped it all up and tore it up because she wasn't there to feed them. So they can be pretty feisty and aggravating. So my moral of the story is don't feed them, because you're actually going to end up causing them more trouble in the long run. Your neighbors probably won't like it. If they're not in your attic, maybe they'll be in your neighbor's attic. And when you call someone to actually trap these animals, they are not supposed to release them back into the wild. They're actually supposed to terminate them. So that is one thing to keep in mind, that if someone is releasing them back into the wild, then they're doing it illegally if they don't have a permit to do so.